The hand of Lucy Harris closed around my wrist with a strength I never imagined in a woman like her. Her fingers, weathered by years of scrubbing other people's floors, stopped me dead in my tracks at the foot of the sweeping marble staircase of my Chicago estate. I was holding the most expensive bouquet of roses I had ever bought in my entire life. White and pink petals wrapped in delicate silk paper, heavily perfumed, ready to celebrate the 8 wonderful years of our marriage. But in her weary eyes, there was a desperate warning that no amount of flowers in the world could ever possibly fix. "Sir, do not go up there. For the love of heaven, do not go up there yet." Her voice was barely a trembling whisper, but it sounded like a blaring siren inside my chest. Lucy had never touched me before this moment. In all the time she had been working in my home, she had never even raised her eyes when I walked past her. She served the black coffee with her head bowed, she dusted the antique furniture without making a single sound, and she would slip out of the spacious kitchen the second I walked in. She was the perfect shadow, the flawless employee, that invisible woman my wife had hired through an exclusive agency, and whom, I must confess with shame, I barely ever noticed. My name is Edward Miller. I am a businessman, an only child, and the sole heir to a massive textile factory that my father, Robert Miller, built from absolutely nothing before he passed away. I was, or at least I thought I was, the most fortunate man I knew in the entire state of Illinois. I had a prosperous company, a lifelong best friend whom I loved dearly, and a beautiful wife named Catherine Vance, who waited for me every single night. On that particular afternoon, with only a few hours left before our luxurious anniversary dinner, I decided to leave the corporate office early to surprise her. That morning I had woken up early, still smelling the lingering scent of Catherine's expensive French perfume on the silk pillowcase. I watched her sleep, and thought to myself that I was truly a blessed man. I went down to the kitchen and found Lucy preparing the morning breakfast. As always, she stepped aside, her hands crossed humbly over her white apron, refusing to make eye contact. I gave her a cheerful good morning, and she responded with a thread of a voice. I briefly wondered what kind of life story that quiet woman carried, but I did not stop to ask. I simply drank my coffee, read the morning newspaper, and drove off to work. By mid-afternoon, in the grand boardroom of Miller Textiles, my best friend and minority partner Matthew Smith suggested we cancel the final meeting of the day. He gave me that familiar, easygoing smile he had worn since our university days, and told me to go home early to buy something beautiful for Catherine. I hugged him with the profound trust of someone embracing a blood brother. Matthew was the friend who stood by me at my father's funeral, the man who introduced me to Catherine at an art gallery all those years ago, and the one who held my shaking hand when I signed the corporate papers. I stopped by the finest floral shop in the downtown district, asking the elderly florist for the largest anniversary arrangement she could possibly assemble. I walked out carrying a massive bouquet that I could barely wrap my arms around, feeling like a foolishly happy teenager. I drove to the wealthy suburban neighborhood with the radio playing softly, practicing my romantic speech out loud in the empty leather seats of my car. I was grinning like an absolute idiot, anticipating the tears of joy that would surely fall from my beloved wife's eyes the moment I walked through the front door. When I entered the grand foyer of the house, the very first thing I noticed was the suffocating silence. The second thing was Lucy, standing completely frozen at the foot of the marble stairs, gripping a white cleaning cloth with white-knuckled intensity, as if she had been waiting for me to arrive for hours. When I told her I was going upstairs to surprise Catherine, she shattered every invisible protocol that governs the relationship between an employer and a domestic worker. She looked me directly in the eyes, without a single hint of hesitation, and physically blocked my path, begging me to listen to her before I ruined everything. I tried to push past her, laughing off her warning as some kind of elaborate practical joke, or a surprise party Catherine had planned. But Lucy's grip only tightened. Just as I demanded she let me go, a sound floated down from the second-floor master bedroom. It was the unmistakable, intimate laughter of my wife. But she was not alone. A low, amused, masculine voice responded to her, followed by another shared fit of laughter. My knees buckled, the massive bouquet tilted, and a single pink rose fell onto the marble floor with a sickeningly delicate sound as I realized the voice belonged to Matthew. We descended the stairs toward the kitchen in the heaviest silence I had ever experienced in my entire life, with every crushed rose petal beneath my leather shoes sounding like a bitter reproach. Lucy walked ahead of me without looking back, moving with a strange, calculated serenity, as if she had rehearsed this exact nightmare for months. The kitchen had always been my favorite room, designed by my late mother with a long, solid oak table where she claimed no family problem could remain unresolved. Lucy locked the heavy wooden door with military precision, sliding the deadbolt into place, which immediately made my racing heart beat even faster against my ribs. From behind the collection of spice jars in the grand pantry, Lucy pulled out an object wrapped carefully in a simple linen napkin. She placed it on the oak table and unrolled it to reveal a small, older model cellular phone, a worn notebook, and two thick yellow envelopes tied together with a piece of brown twine. I demanded to know who she really was and why she was doing this, feeling my entire reality fracturing around me. Lucy looked at me with a gaze so heavy with ancient sorrow that I had to look away, promising to explain everything only after I listened to the undeniable truth. She pressed a button on the small phone, and the treacherous voices of my wife and my best friend filled the quiet kitchen. Catherine's voice dripped with malice as she mocked my naive trust, laughing about how I signed any legal document Matthew put in front of me without ever reading the fine print. Matthew responded with a cold, calculated tone, confirming that the latest corporate transfer had been successfully camouflaged as an equipment purchase for the textile factories. He bragged that by the time I realized what was happening, I would be left completely bankrupt, without a company, without a home, and without a single penny to my name. The recording continued, twisting the knife even deeper into my gut, as Catherine eagerly asked about the final inheritance and when their miserable charade would finally end. Matthew assured her that their 8 years of waiting were about to pay off, mentioning that his revenge was not just about the money, but about a dark history his family had with my father. I did not cry, I did not scream, and I did not throw the kitchen chairs. I simply sat there, completely anesthetized by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Lucy gently stopped the recording, explaining that she had been capturing their conversations for weeks through a small hole near the upstairs bathroom hinges. She opened the first yellow envelope and spread out dozens of photocopied bank statements and internal transfer receipts from Miller Textiles. They all pointed to a shadow corporation called Solana Investments, a company I only recognized vaguely as one of the third-party vendors Matthew had recently brought on board. Lucy pointed a calloused finger at the authorized signatures on the documents, revealing that the owners of this fake company were Matthew Smith, Catherine Vance, and a mysterious third man whose signature was intentionally illegible. When I asked how a maid knew how to read complex financial portfolios, she lowered her eyes and confessed that in a past life she had been a skilled accountant. Lucy then told me that the stolen money was only a small fraction of the tragedy. Pulling out the second envelope with trembling hands, she spread out several vintage black and white photographs that she had found taped behind a heavy painting in the private study. The main picture showed an older, elegant man sitting on a park bench, holding the hand of a beautiful young woman under a massive oak tree. I recognized the man instantly as my late father, Robert Miller, but the woman was a complete stranger to me until Lucy revealed with tears in her eyes that it was her older sister, Mary Harris. Mary had died tragically young and completely alone many years ago, leaving her family devastated and searching for answers in the dark. Lucy had found a box of hidden love letters from a married man promising to take care of Mary, signed only with the letter R. After decades of searching, Lucy finally identified my father when she saw his obituary in the local Chicago newspaper and discovered he had left behind a wealthy son. She admitted that she had initially taken the cleaning job to seek vengeance against my family. But after watching me for months, she realized I was a good man who was being eaten alive by vultures. Just as the crushing weight of my family's secret sins began to settle on my shoulders, the internal kitchen telephone suddenly rang, startling us both. It was the direct line from the master bedroom. Lucy picked it up without speaking, listened for a brief second, and gently hung the receiver back on the wall. She turned to me with a steely resolve and instructed me to go upstairs, smile at the woman who was plotting my ruin, and pretend that absolutely nothing was wrong. As I slowly walked back up the rose-covered stairs, listening to Catherine's sweet, venomous voice calling my name, I knew my old life was officially dead. I reached the top of the grand staircase, with legs that felt like they were cast from solid iron, my heart performing frantic acrobatics inside my hollow chest. Catherine appeared at the end of the long hallway wearing that practiced, picture-perfect smile that had served as the beautiful postcard of my life for nearly a decade. I smoothly lied to her, explaining that I had tripped on the marble steps in my excitement and ruined the anniversary bouquet, promising to buy her another one before our dinner reservations. She accepted the excuse with a dismissive stroke of my cheek, completely unaware that I was memorizing every single micro-expression of her deceitful face. That night, I claimed a terrible lower back pain and slept alone on the leather sofa in my downstairs study, staring blankly at the dark ceiling. At the first light of dawn, I took my most inconspicuous car, turned off my corporate cellular phone, and drove out to the address Lucy had given me. I navigated through the affluent suburbs and slowly descended into a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, an area characterized by colorful murals, small bustling corner stores, and narrow streets. It was a vibrant, struggling part of the city I had never once set foot in, despite living only 20 miles away my entire life. Lucy's house was a modest, impeccably clean structure, painted a soft yellow, featuring a small concrete patio, with a single thriving lemon tree in a terracotta pot. She was waiting for me at the front door, stripped of her degrading maid's uniform, wearing a simple cotton dress and an aura of unbroken dignity. Inside the small living room, sitting on a faded rug, was a bright-eyed young boy eagerly sketching intricate architectural blueprints with a handful of colored pencils. Lucy introduced him with immense pride as Michael, her beloved grandson, the sole reason she had swallowed her pride to scrub floors in the mansions of the wealthy elite. Michael proudly announced that he was going to be a famous architect when he grew up, a declaration that stirred something deeply painful and protective within my barren heart. Lucy gently shooed the boy into his tiny bedroom, promising him a massive cheese omelet once the adults finished discussing their very serious grown-up matters. We sat down at a scratched wooden dining table that smelled faintly of toasted bread and fresh coffee, a scent that felt infinitely more like a real home than my cold mansion. It was there that Lucy finally peeled back the layers of her tragic past, explaining how her only daughter had fallen in with a dangerous crowd. Her daughter had tried to escape an abusive relationship, taking baby Michael and fleeing, but she mysteriously vanished on her way home from work one rainy evening. The police investigation led absolutely nowhere, and the crushing grief caused Lucy to lose her accounting job, her savings, and eventually everything she owned except this small family house. To feed her orphaned grandson, she took the only job that asked for no background checks and offered immediate cash, rendering her completely invisible to the wealthy families she served. She told me not to pity her, explaining that her invisibility had become her greatest weapon, allowing her to uncover the dark secrets of the Miller household. She walked into the back bedroom and returned carrying the worn notebook I had seen the day before, opening it to reveal an ancient, yellowed envelope. Inside was a heavy, golden key with a distinct heart-shaped head, a relic my father had given to her sister Mary decades ago before he abandoned her. Robert Miller had told Mary that if she ever needed the absolute truth about his life, she should take the golden key to his trusted family lawyer. Unfortunately, Mary died before she could ever make the journey, and the secret remained locked away in the shadows for over 30 long years. Lucy revealed that she had recently discovered the identity of the old lawyer. It was Dr. Arthur Brown, my father's lifelong confidant, whose office was still located in downtown Chicago. I agreed that we needed to visit him immediately, but I had to ask Lucy why she was risking her own safety to help the son of the man who ruined her sister. She looked at me with a profound, healing wisdom, stating that a person who suffers immense pain can either become a monster or vow to never inflict that pain on others. She chose the latter, recognizing that I was nothing like my cowardly father. Before we left for the bustling city center, Lucy took my hands across the wooden table and dropped a final, cryptic revelation that made my blood run entirely cold. She told me that her sister Mary had not just left behind romantic letters. She had left behind something else, something my father never even knew existed. She refused to tell me what it was until we spoke to the lawyer, insisting that the betrayal happening in my house was just the final chapter of a very old, deeply rooted tragedy. I promised little Michael I would bring him a professional drafting set, and Lucy and I stepped out into the morning sun to face the sins of the past. We drove in tense silence toward the towering skyscrapers of downtown Chicago, pulling up to an aging brick building that still utilized manually operated wrought iron elevators. The office of Dr. Arthur Brown was a relic of a bygone era, lined with dusty leather-bound legal books, smelling of old parchment and stale pipe tobacco. The lawyer was an incredibly old man now, with thick spectacles and trembling hands, but his mind remained as sharp as a finely honed steel blade. When he saw me walk through the heavy mahogany doors, accompanied by a woman bearing the unmistakable facial features of the Harris family, the color drained completely from his wrinkled face. He whispered my childhood nickname, his voice cracking with the weight of a promise he had kept hidden for over 4 decades of loyal legal service. He confessed that on his deathbed, my father had predicted I would one day walk into this very office, accompanied by a woman holding a golden, heart-shaped key. Dr. Brown slowly pushed himself out of his leather chair, walked over to a massive portrait of Abraham Lincoln, and swung the heavy painting aside to reveal a mechanical wall safe. He spun the brass dial, reached deep inside the metal cavity, and pulled out a thick envelope sealed tightly with dark red dripping wax. Written on the front in my father's elegant, unmistakable cursive handwriting were instructions directing me to read the contents, and finally learned that I was not his only child. The heavy parchment trembled violently in my hands as I broke the brittle red wax, pulling out a lengthy confession written during the final, guilt-ridden days of his life. My father admitted that before he met my mother, he had deeply loved Mary Harris, but his overwhelming cowardice and fear of a public society scandal caused him to abandon her. He confessed that Mary had given birth to a son, a boy who grew up in the shadows, far away from the immense wealth and privilege of the Miller family empire. The letter explained that my father eventually tracked the boy down years later, but lacked the moral courage to introduce himself, opting instead to watch him from a safe distance. He realized with horror that his abandoned son had somehow discovered his true lineage and had intentionally infiltrated my life, not to seek a father's love, but to exact a catastrophic revenge. My father begged for my forgiveness and instructed me to open the smaller secondary envelope to learn the true identity of the brother I never knew I had. I tore open the second envelope, pulled out a single slip of white paper, and stopped breathing entirely when I read the name, Matthew Smith. My best friend, the man who had stood by my side through every major milestone of my adult life, was actually my biological half-brother, carrying out a lifelong vendetta. Dr. Brown gently interrupted my shock to explain that my father had secretly established a massive, hidden trust fund designed to make financial amends to Mary Harris's descendants. This secret trust was the true ultimate prize that Matthew and Catherine were desperately trying to steal through their fraudulent corporate contracts. The lawyer warned us that if I signed their documents on Friday night, they would legally drain both Miller Textiles and the hidden reparation fund, leaving everyone completely destitute. Realizing we desperately needed the original fraudulent contracts to prove their criminal conspiracy, Lucy and I devised a dangerous plan to infiltrate the Miller Textiles corporate headquarters that very night. We arrived at the towering glass building past 9 o'clock, with Lucy dressed convincingly in a standard blue janitorial uniform she had kept from her previous cleaning jobs. The elderly night watchman, Earl Clark, who had worked for my family for over 40 years, greeted me with a knowing, grandfatherly smile and conveniently turned a blind eye to our after-hours presence. He quietly hinted that he had seen Matthew sneaking around the executive floor with a shady, unidentified older man, confirming our worst suspicions about a third accomplice. Using my master executive key, we slipped into the dark, silent offices, relying only on the pale moonlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Lucy moved with incredible efficiency, ignoring the obvious file cabinets, and instead running her hands expertly underneath Matthew's massive mahogany desk. She discovered a hidden false-bottom drawer held together by small screws, prying it open to reveal a thick stack of legal folders and a digital memory drive. We also found a sickening stack of glossy photographs documenting Matthew and Catherine's romantic vacations, funded entirely by the company's stolen accounts under the guise of fake business trips. The most chilling discovery was a handwritten note clipped to the back of the fraudulent contract, detailing a violent backup plan in case I refused to sign the papers on Friday. It stated that they would orchestrate a fatal home invasion to silence me permanently, making it look like a random burglary gone tragically wrong in the wealthy suburbs. Recognizing that my mansion was no longer safe, Lucy grabbed the documents and insisted we flee the city limits immediately before Matthew's hired thugs arrived to search my home. We thanked Earl on our way out, jumped into my car, and drove off into the deep, dark expanse of the Illinois countryside, leaving my shattered reality behind. We drove for over 2 hours, until the bright city lights faded into the quiet, rolling darkness of the rural countryside, eventually turning onto a rugged dirt road. We arrived at an abandoned, weather-beaten farmhouse, surrounded by overgrown weeds and an ancient, towering oak tree that looked exactly like the one in my father's photograph. Lucy explained that this was the original Harris family home, preserved through the decades as a silent monument to the tragedies her mother and sister had endured. The air inside the small wooden house smelled of dry dust, old pine, and the heavy, lingering melancholy of a family torn apart by secrets and societal shame. In the center of the main room sat a large, rusted trunk, which Lucy opened with a delicate reverence, revealing piles of vintage clothing, old dolls, and fading sepia photographs. She carefully pressed her thumbs against the wooden bottom of the trunk, lifting a false panel to expose a hidden compartment filled with deeply personal family letters. She pulled out a fragile, tear-stained letter written by Mary Harris, just days before she passed away, clutching her newborn baby in this very room. The words written on that paper changed the entire trajectory of my anger, transforming my blinding rage toward Matthew into a profound, heartbreaking pity. Mary had explicitly written that she did not want her son to grow up poisoned by bitterness, begging whoever raised him to teach him forgiveness rather than vengeance. Lucy explained that after Mary died, the baby was given to a poor, loving family named Smith, who raised him kindly until they perished in a tragic automobile accident. It was then that a mysterious older man approached the orphaned teenage Matthew, revealing his Miller bloodline, but intentionally hiding Mary's final wishes of peace. This man twisted the narrative, feeding the grieving boy a steady diet of toxic hatred, molding him into the perfect, ruthless weapon against the Miller empire. I asked Lucy if she knew the identity of the mysterious manipulator, and she revealed that it was Oliver Carter, the former head accountant of Miller Textiles, whom my father had fired abruptly. Oliver was the illegible third signature on the fraudulent bank accounts, the mastermind pulling the strings from the shadows, using my brother's misplaced grief to steal millions of dollars. Armed with the complete truth and the stolen documents, I left the farmhouse at dawn, returning to my mansion just in time to pretend I was waking up from a peaceful slumber. Later that afternoon, Dr. Brown arranged a highly confidential meeting with Diana Parker, the most feared and respected financial crimes prosecutor in the entire state. Diana reviewed the stolen contracts, the secret recordings, and the photographic evidence, with a stone-cold expression, her sharp eyes scanning the paperwork like a hawk hunting its prey. She concluded that we had enough to arrest them, but to ensure Oliver Carter couldn't slip away by blaming Matthew and Catherine, we needed a recorded, real-time confession. She proposed setting an elaborate trap during our upcoming anniversary dinner on Friday night, wiring my clothing with hidden microphones while a heavily armed tactical police unit waited outside. She warned me that Matthew would face severe federal prison time unless he willingly turned against Oliver and confessed before the police breached the front doors. Desperate to save the brother I had just discovered, I invited Matthew to a small, run-down coffee shop on the outskirts of the city the following morning. We sat in a quiet corner booth, drinking bitter black coffee, while the heavy rain battered against the foggy glass windows of the diner. I looked into his familiar eyes and gently guided the conversation toward the concept of family, asking him if he ever felt like his life was meant for something entirely different. For a brief second, the confident, manipulative corporate shark vanished, and I saw the deeply wounded, orphaned boy staring back at me, carrying the crushing weight of a false vengeance. Matthew looked down at his shaking hands and admitted that his entire life felt like a dark, suffocating tunnel with no light at the end. I did not push him further, nor did I reveal that I knew his secret. I simply placed my hand over his and told him that true brothers always forgive each other. I told him that if he ever wanted to step out of the dark and return to the right path, I would be there waiting for him with open arms. He swallowed hard, hastily paid for the cheap coffee, and walked out into the freezing rain, leaving me to pray that my words had pierced through Oliver Carter's decades of toxic brainwashing. Friday evening arrived with a suffocating tension that hung heavily in the air, while Catherine cheerfully arranged expensive silver cutlery and lit scented candles across the grand mahogany dining table. The doorbell chimed precisely at 7 o'clock, and Matthew walked in wearing a sharp tailored suit, accompanied by the slithering, arrogant presence of Oliver Carter. Oliver greeted me with a sickeningly fake smile, patting my shoulder and making a cynical comment about how proud my late father would be of our expanding corporate partnerships. I forced a polite smile, feeling the cold metallic square of the hidden police microphone taped securely against my chest beneath my crisp white dress shirt. We sat through a painfully elegant three-course meal, enduring Catherine's rehearsed laughter and Oliver's subtle, mocking jabs about the future of the textile industry. When the dessert plates were cleared, Catherine eagerly produced the thick leather folder containing the fraudulent legal contracts, pushing a gold fountain pen toward my hand. Before signing, I leaned back in my chair, looked directly at Oliver, and calmly asked him to explain the true purpose behind the newly formed shell company. Thinking I was nothing more than an ignorant, defeated fool, Oliver arrogantly boasted about the entire criminal scheme, confidently confessing their plan into the hidden federal microphone. Oliver viciously declared that Miller Textiles rightfully belonged to Matthew, mocking my father's legacy and revealing the deep-seated hatred that had driven his decades-long manipulation. Catherine giggled softly, stroking Matthew's arm, completely oblivious to the fact that Matthew was staring blankly at the table, his face pale and his hands trembling uncontrollably. Suddenly, the swinging doors of the kitchen pushed open, and Lucy emerged from the shadows, walking tall and proud without her degrading apron. She completely ignored the furious demands of my wife and walked straight toward Matthew, placing a fragile, yellowed envelope directly onto his empty porcelain dinner plate. "Young Matthew, this is a message from your real mother, Mary Harris, my older sister," Lucy announced, her strong voice echoing loudly off the high dining room ceiling. Oliver jumped out of his chair, furiously demanding that the crazy maid be thrown out, but Matthew ignored him entirely, tearing open the ancient envelope with desperate hands. He read his mother's final words, reading her desperate plea against hatred, and the elaborate fortress of vengeance Oliver had built around his heart instantly crumbled into dust. A single heavy tear dropped onto the vintage paper, and my brother began to weep with the agonizing, primal grief of a man mourning a lifetime of stolen years. Oliver lunged across the table to snatch the letter, but Matthew stood up abruptly, shoving the old manipulator backward, screaming that Oliver had poisoned his mind with devastating lies. Catherine began to hyperventilate, finally realizing the catastrophic trap she had walked into, just as the heavy oak front doors of the mansion were violently smashed open by the police. Prosecutor Diana Parker marched into the dining room, flanked by a dozen heavily armed tactical officers, declaring that everyone in the room was officially under federal arrest. Oliver tried to bolt toward the patio doors, but was immediately tackled to the marble floor, while Catherine collapsed into a hysterical, sobbing mess as the steel handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Amidst the flashing red and blue police lights illuminating the grand foyer, Matthew stood completely frozen, offering his wrists to the officers without a single word of protest. I stepped forward, wrapped my arms around his shaking shoulders, and held him tightly against my chest, whispering that he was finally home and the war was officially over. In the following months, Matthew cooperated fully with the federal authorities, ensuring Oliver and Catherine faced severe prison sentences for their extensive financial crimes. Because of his crucial testimony and manipulated past, Matthew received a lenient alternative sentence of community service, dedicating his days to teaching trade skills to troubled, orphaned youth in the city. With the legal guidance of Dr. Arthur Brown, we successfully unlocked my father's hidden reparation fund, legally transferring half of the massive fortune to Matthew as his rightful biological inheritance. Matthew refused to keep the money for himself, using every single dollar to establish a state-of-the-art vocational school named the Mary Harris Academy, honoring the mother he never knew. I used a portion of my own funds to completely renovate Lucy's modest home, building a beautiful architectural studio for little Michael, whom I now proudly claimed as my adopted nephew. Lucy permanently retired her maid's uniform, taking her rightful place at the head of our expanded family table, proving that blood is merely an accident of birth, while true family is a deliberate choice. Today, when people ask me how a man survives the absolute destruction of his life, I tell them about the afternoon a bouquet of expensive roses fell down a marble staircase. I tell them about an invisible woman with calloused hands who bravely stepped out of the shadows to stop me from climbing into a web of deceit. This experience taught me that the deepest wounds we carry are often healed by the very people society trains us to ignore. We spend our lives building massive walls of wealth and status to protect ourselves from the world, completely forgetting that true salvation usually arrives through the humble servant's door. Never underestimate the quiet people standing in the background of your life, for they are often the ones holding the fragile threads that keep your entire world from falling apart. When betrayal shatters the foundation of everything you thought was real, do not desperately cling to the broken pieces. Instead, embrace the painful truth, forgive those who were manipulated by their own unresolved pain, and have the profound courage to rebuild your family, not with the blood of the past, but with the boundless grace of the present.